Hi, my name is Kate, and I love to read. Like, I was carrying books around with me before Kindles were a thing. So I decided to start a podcast where I interview the authors of some of my favorite books, ask them all of my questions so that I can read between the lines of the books. Welcome back to another episode of Between the Lines. Today I'm here with N.A. Cooper, who is the author of Ripple Effect, which was a fantastic book that I got to read recently. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So before we talk about the book, I did want to get to know a little bit about you.
Okay.
So when did you know that you wanted to write a book, or like when did you know you wanted to be an author?
So I've always enjoyed reading and writing. It's always something that I've done as a hobby. Some of my earliest memories are, writing short stories as a child. And I think what took me a while was to find that belief in myself that I could write a book. And I think once I was able to say to myself, I can do this, it was more about the time. And when the lockdown restrictions came into place through the pandemic, I suddenly found myself at home, a lot more, and I really tried to utilise that time. And that was when I really thought, I can do this. I can actually finish a book. Yeah,
that's really cool. I do feel like it's like such an ambitious thing to be like, I'm gonna write a book. So it makes sense that like having the time was what made you like, okay, let's do it.
Oh, absolutely. I tried so many times before to write a book, right back from, being probably in my teens. I'd tried to complete one, and I'd really struggle with the momentum of being able to keep going because other things obviously got in the way. So yeah, it was definitely a lot of different things happening at the same time that allowed me to be able to do that.
That is really cool. So what is your writing process like? So did you know exactly what the story was going to look like? Did it kind of unveil itself to you as you wrote it? How did that work out?
Yeah, it was definitely more as the plot developed. I'm not a planner.
Mm-hmm.
I start off with kind of an idea. I know probably the start and usually the end. How I get there is more just let's keep writing and see what happens. I get to a certain point where a certain degree of planning is needed to make sure there's no loose ends and to really be able to get down the key scenes and how they're all going to pan out in the end. I find the act of planning quite overwhelming. I've tried to do it a couple of times, and sitting down and just thinking to myself, how am I going to get from A to B is always quite daunting to me. So I've not actually done it, but I continue to try.
Yeah, I mean, if it works for you that you don't have to plan though, it's not necessarily bad if you can always pull it off, just kind of ready as you go.
Yeah, I guess it can get to a point where it feels quite stressful when I've got a lot of things to tie up and I'm not really sure what's happening. But yeah, I mean, it's worked so far. But yeah, I keep saying to myself, next time I'm going to try and plan, at least have a rough overview of the book, but I'm yet to do it.
Yeah. Well, we'll just have to see as the next ones come out how it progresses. So what about your characters? So do you mostly know who they are, or do you kind of detail them before you get going?
Yeah, I think my main character I have a pretty good idea about before I start writing. I think I do character profiles for all of the characters in the book, but they can be quite basic. They can just literally be characteristics. What do they look like, and hair colour, and what's their relationship to the rest of the characters, what's their job, where do they live, things like that. And they'll tend to grow more as the plot develops. I'll just keep updating and adjusting, and sometimes they can change as well. And but yeah, I always like to feel a bit more of a connection to my main character before I jump in and start writing.
That makes a lot of sense. It is what's driving the biggest part of the story. Yeah. So how would you describe ripple effects in a couple sentences?
So I would say that ripple effect essentially explores the aftermath of a 15-year-old girl's illicit relationship with her teacher, and it looks at how, 15 years later, that trauma continues to have an enormous impact on her life.
So other than the fact that you were in lockdown and have the time to do it, what prompted you to write this story? Like, what was your inspiration for it?
I think I wanted to explore the idea of consequences, and that's really how the idea began. I wanted to look at how the ripple effect isn't always fair or proportionate, and not all consequences are immediate, as you see with ripple effect. And I found it really interesting, the idea that our lives could be completely different, if we'd done something differently at one moment in time, or made another choice at some point in our lives. And that's what you see with Erin. If something happens that changes her life and her future, and continues to affect her 15 years later. And I just found the premise of that really interesting.
Yeah, it was fascinating. Definitely explored all sides of what you just explained. So we are going to talk about the book now. And so I always tell people, if they haven't read it yet, to go read it and then come back and keep listening. But if you are here because you've already read it, obviously just keep listening. So at the beginning of the book, Erin is attacked. And it's pretty brutal. But as she's crying, she thinks, I want to shout and tell him that he is not allowed my tears, the man who's attacking her. They belong to regrets in my own life, if you can call it that. A half-life, maybe. A life unlived, an avoided life. So that really sets the stage for how Erin has lived her life since the trauma happened in her teen years. So did you know, it sounds like you kind of did, going into it, that you specifically wanted to explore how small people can make themselves when they internalize someone else's guilt?
Yeah, I think I wanted to explore the ways in which we can often, withdraw from friends or from society in general in order to protect ourselves. And the quote which you just read actually was an important one to me, and I actually considered using A Half-Life as the title of the book at one point, because I think, that's exactly what Erin does. She leads a half-life, and she sacrifices so much of her life in order to feel safe. And she talks about these internal set of rules that she has, and she lives within the confines of them in order to, keep her world small but risk averse.
Yes. Yeah, that really describes it so well. And then in her, she is always trying to avoid unsafe situations. Mm-hmm. And at one point she's reflecting and thinks there are no unsafe places, just unsafe people polluting the world around them. So do you think that distinction was kind of how Erin kept herself from not totally shutting down? So maybe if I can predict unsafe people, I can still go places.
Yeah, definitely. I think, Erin feels connected to nature, and mainly that's because it helps her feel connected to her dad. But I think she's able to make that distinction in her own mind because, there's the distinction between people who are able to cause her pain and places which can have the opposite, they can help restore her calm. And in the book she talks about feeling connected to the ocean, and when things get really bad for her, that's where she goes. She goes to the ocean to clear her mind. And I think that making that distinction has been necessary for her sanity. And it's helped her in her adult life when people have continued to fail her.
She kind of continues to be in the present, really frustrated when people do ask her questions about her past. Mm-hmm. And so she thinks, what is it about people needing to know where everyone has come from? Why can't people be satisfied with where we are? And she obviously would really love if the present was the only thing affecting her life, but that hasn't been the case for her. Mm-hmm. So were you kind of trying to depict her own inner struggle with being able to be in the present?
Yeah, I think a big part of why Erin keeps her distance from people is because she knows that inevitably getting close to somebody comes with questions and opening up parts of herself which she just isn't willing to do. And that's why she's in an unhappy marriage, because they don't communicate well. It's a marriage of convenience, and it allows her to keep those barriers in place. And the internal struggle that Erin has is that she's lonely, but the thing she craves is also the thing that she fears, and that's connecting with people.
Yeah, it was pretty powerful near the end when she was realizing that as well, how like she fell in love and like so many people got hurt because of it, so she's just kind of like eternally scared of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's almost ironically Danny, the man she has the relationship with, is the one who kind of teaches about the ripple effect, and explains like when an initial disturbance causes a series of other disturbances, usually unintentional but inevitable. Every action has a consequence. And so a large part of Erin's story is definitely the grappling with the fact that she feels like she caused all of the terrible ripple effects from this relationship with him and everything that happened after it. Do you think his inability to take responsibility for his actions, since he was the adult in the situation, is part of what like caused her to absorb all of the guilt for it?
Yeah, I think she was failed by a lot of people, and as a vulnerable 15-year-old girl whose world was turned upside down, she absolutely absorbed the guilt, and she carried that with her for so long that it just became part of her, of who she was.
Yeah.
And the fact that other people in the community shunned her and turned against her dad as well only exacerbated those feelings and made them feel more real. And as the years passed and she adjusted her life to account for what had happened, it only made it seem more necessary to continue doing so.
By the end of the story, though, she really confidently ends up defending herself.
Yeah.
And so she's thinking about it. She's like, for the first time, I realize I believe in what I'm saying. I believe in my innocence. In the face of being told I'm to blame, I realize the unfairness of it. I'm not blameless, but nor was it my fault. So do you think she kind of like had to get to the point of defending someone or defending herself to someone else for her to finally kind of like defend herself against her self-hatred that she has for herself?
Yeah, I think she had to let her guard down, and I think it took having someone that she cared about voicing those things that she'd always believed, and it made her question them and the unfairness of it all.
Yeah.
And it was the first time in her adult life that she'd been pushed that far and pushed to question those voices in her head. And in that moment she finds this strength that I don't think she realised that she had. And she becomes, like you say, she's very insistent that she finally believes in her innocence, and it's what hopefully the reader knows all along and wants her to have this moment of I am innocent, and she's a victim. And I think it did take that moment for her to really realise that.
You mentioned like the ocean was always where she went when she wanted to feel calm, and she actually does return to her hometown, and she returns to the ocean there as well, and remembers how her dad told her no matter how many thousands of miles they travel, they'll always return to the beach where they hatched. And I love that metaphor as like, at least that's how I interpreted it, as an example of like reintegration for her, and being able to like return to and accept like all of the parts of herself. So did you know when you started writing the book that you wanted to use kind of like everything that happened in the present timeline to help her feel okay about the past?
Yeah, I knew I wanted her to have an ending that felt like a beginning for her, a new beginning. And I think most importantly, I was mindful that I wanted to portray that strength can look different to everyone. And for Erin, she doesn't believe that she is strong. She hasn't got that belief in herself. She thinks she's weak and scarred by what's happened. But actually she has considerable resilience, and she's found a way to survive. And I wanted that resilience and everything she's had to endure to feel like it led her to a point where she can finally start again, and she has that belief in herself now.
Yeah, I just thought, like, I loved the ending, because sometimes endings can kind of be whatever, but it felt like even though we don't technically know what's gonna happen now for her, it was cool to see it like full circle, that she was able to go back at least.
Yeah, and I think for me, it always needed to be something that was, on her terms, that she's done it, and she has been given money, she's been given the check, and the amount of people that said to me, I wouldn't have torn the check up, I would have took the money, and it's, that she wants to do that on her terms. She needs it to be something that she's doing on her own, and because she believes in herself. And for me, that she needed that moment to finally believe in herself and take, she pulls over as she's driving back into her hometown, and she tears up the check, and feels as though she's welcomed home by the ocean. I think she needed that moment on herself to kind of breathe and realize this is my decision, and I'm doing this on my terms now. Although she's been pushed to do it, she's still doing it on her own terms. She's not using someone else's money, or she's going back, and it's all on her.
It's kind of like it's like the main way you are going to feel empowered again, is that like you had the agency to do it yourself.
Oh, absolutely, and I wanted it to end on a moment where you could make up your own mind, because I think sometimes they're the best endings to books, where you're not delivered every single answer at the end of a book. You are left to think, what happens with her and her dad, and where she goes from there.
I agree. There's like resolution for her, but then we can kind of just like imagine what her life would be like after having resolution for herself.
Yeah, definitely.
So I've been asking everyone at the end, what book have you read recently that you have loved?
I've just finished Hostage by Claire McIntosh. Really enjoyed that, because it was something a bit different. I hadn't read anything like that before, I guess. So I enjoyed that. There's been a few that I've read recently that have probably been older books that I've found, or classics that I've read that I've really enjoyed, that have obviously passed me by before. I like digging out some of the old ones as well, or I've been rereading a few recently as well. I reread Where the Crawdads Sing. I reread that because of the film coming out. That's one of my favourites.
It's so good.
So beautiful. That book so much. Yeah, that's definitely one of my all-time favourites.
Have you seen the movie yet?
No, so I've reread it because I knew I was going to see it. Have you seen it?
I haven't seen it yet.
No, I'm going to. I have this thing with things being turned into movies when I've really loved the book, where I'm quite apprehensive about going.
I know, I'm a little bit nervous about it too. I'm like, I want it to be as good as the book.
Yeah, I've heard really good things from friends of mine who've loved the book just as much, and they've said the movie was really good as well, and really quite brilliant. So fingers crossed.
Now I want to go see it tonight. Where can people find you to follow you, so they can kind of stay up to date with everything you're putting out? Just kind of plug whatever.
So I'm on Twitter and Instagram. I don't know their handles off the top of my head.
That's okay. I'll put it in the
Thank you. I do maybe more on Instagram. I think I'm on more. I love the whole Bookstagram community, and that's where I get a lot of my recommendations from as well. You can find me on there. And I have a new book coming out in October, so hopefully I can pop some stuff on about that soon.
That's exciting. That's awesome. I'll put all those links in the show notes so that everyone can find that. And thank you for being on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.